Why does the brain hate silence? Discover the psychological truth few dare to face. In this video, we dive deep into the human mind to understand why silence is so unsettling, and why we avoid it at all costs. Neuroscience, Carl Jung's deep psychology, and our hyperconnected modern world reveal an uncomfortable truth. Silence forces us to confront who we really are. How does the brain react to the absence of stimuli? Why has noise become an addiction? How can silence be the key to self-awareness, emotional healing, and inner peace? If you feel anxious in silence, struggle to be alone, or fear stopping, this video is for you. Get ready for a transformative journey between external chaos and your inner world. Watch until the end and discover why silence isn't emptiness, it's revelation. Subscribe to the channel for more content on psychology, self-discovery, and the human mind. Silence is not empty, it's a mirror. Imagine you're at home at night. The TV is off. Your phone is in another room. The only sound is your own breathing. And suddenly you feel uncomfortable, restless, anxious, maybe even a slight tightness in your chest. But why? Nothing is happening. No danger, no pressure, no noise. And yet, your brain goes on alert. For many people, absolute silence is almost unbearable. And the reason goes far beyond just not liking to be still. What we call silence is actually a brutal psychological mirror. It removes the noise of the outside world, and in doing so, forces us to see the noise inside. Disorganized thoughts, old memories, unresolved pain, emptiness we try to fill with stimuli. Suddenly, all of this rises to the surface like a muffled scream. Science has already proven the human brain was shaped by evolution to seek constant stimulation for survival, socializing, or controlling the environment. The moment those stimuli vanish, like in complete silence, the limbic system, responsible for emotions and memory, starts reprocessing traumas, repressed experiences, and unresolved conflicts. That's why when you're in silence, you're not doing nothing. You're actually activating deep areas of your brain usually silenced by the overload of tasks, sounds, and distractions. This is why so many people need music to fall asleep. This is why so many reach for their phones at the slightest moment of boredom. It's not just technology addiction. It's an escape from the mind itself. Supporting quote Eric from, most people do not want freedom. What they want is to avoid the burden of their own consciousness. Now pause for a second. Recall a moment when you were in complete silence without distractions. Did you feel at peace or at war with your own thoughts? That is the question that begins the true path of self-awareness. In the next part, we'll explore what silence does to the human brain biologically, and why it is seen as a warning signal by ancestral systems in our body. Silence activates the fear brain, the neuroscience of discomfort. You've probably heard the saying, silence is golden, but for the human brain, silence can sound like a fire alarm. When we find ourselves in absolute silence, no stimuli, no notifications, no background music, a very ancient part of our brain activates. The amygdala. This small almond-shaped structure is anything but sweet. It's the core of our fear brain, responsible for detecting threats in the environment and triggering fight, flight, or freeze responses. In the modern world, there are no predators lurking in the forest. But our brain doesn't know that. To it, total silence can be interpreted as a lack of sensory information and, by extension, a warning signal. Because, evolutionarily, silence in nature almost always preceded a predator's attack. Example, imagine a forest where all sounds suddenly stop. Birds cease singing. Insects disappear. That means only one thing. Something dangerous is approaching. And the primitive brain inside us, still alive today, reacts the same way. That's why silence is not interpreted as neutral. It activates hypervigilance, as if something invisible is about to happen. Even without a real threat, your body prepares. Muscles tense, your heart rate slightly increases, and emotional restlessness takes over. Scientific studies confirm this. A Duke University study showed that 2 minutes of total silence activate the brain more than listening to relaxing music. Why? Because silence creates space for the default mode network, DMN, a brain system that processes memories, identity, and deep self-reflection. In other words, in silence, you start revisiting your inner stories, unconscious conflicts, unresolved traumas. And for a brain trained to escape pain, that's like falling into an abyss. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In silence, the unconscious starts knocking at the door. That's why meditation is so hard for many people. That's why total silence feels suffocating. It's not the silence itself, it's what it reveals. Now think, how many times have you run from silence by diving into social media, music, shows, compulsions, or endless tasks? These escapes are not just distractions. They are psychic defenses against the emotional collapse that can come from facing yourself without filters. But here's the paradox. It's precisely in that uncomfortable space of silence that emotional healing begins. It's when the mind stops screaming that the soul begins to whisper. Silence as a mirror of the unconscious. If noise is the modern anesthetic, silence is the brutal mirror where our wounds find a voice. Carl Jung didn't see silence as emptiness. For him, silence was a channel of psychic revelation, a direct bridge to unconscious contents that silently shape who we are, without us realizing it. It is in this silent territory that fears, traumas, and repressed truths emerge, all that which we avoid facing in the noise of everyday life. When the outside world falls quiet, the inner mind begins to speak. But it doesn't speak with words. It speaks in sensations, images, disconnected memories. It brings to the surface fragments of the self that have been forgotten, denied, or banished, the so-called shadow archetypes. Silence is not emptiness. It is projection. What do you feel in absolute silence? Boredom? Anguish? Anger? Fear? Each of these emotions is a lens through which your unconscious manifests. Jung called this phenomenon the confrontation with the shadow, the process of coming into contact with the unrecognized aspects of one's own personality. In silence, this shadow moves, and that can be frightening because we weren't taught how to deal with it. We were taught to ignore it, repress it, move on. Silence unmasks. In the daily rush, we wear 1,000 masks. The competent professional, the ideal partner, the always available friend. But in silence, all these masks lose meaning. And what remains is the bare self without emotional makeup. That's why so many people have existential crises during spiritual retreats, moments of solitude, or even after turning off their phones for a weekend. It's not the silence that causes suffering. It's silence revealing the suffering that has always been there, muffled by stimuli. Silence then becomes a symbolic mirror. It reflects everything we cannot name but that lives within us. Instead of running from this, Jung proposed the opposite, to embrace the inner chaos. Because only what is brought into the light can be transformed. Silence as alchemy. Jungian alchemy wasn't about literally turning lead into gold, but about transforming the raw parts of the psyche into integrated consciousness. In this process, silence plays the role of the alchemical fire. It heats up, disturbs, destabilizes, but also purifies. In deep psychotherapy, for example, there are moments when the therapist remains silent. And this silence is not absence, it's provocation. It forces the patient to look inside, to seek the answer not in the other, but in themselves. Similarly, in daily life, if we can hold silence without compulsively filling it, we discover something powerful. Behind the initial restlessness, there is a silent core within us that is not afraid. That simply is. This is the Jungian self, the integrative center of the psyche, and we only find it when the noise stops. Silence as a path of return. Therefore, silence is more than the absence of sound. It is an invitation to return, a call to stop running from oneself. It is in this unfilled space that true psychological growth happens. You can only become whole when you are able to sit with yourself in silence and not run away from what you feel. Silence as a tool for inner transformation. After understanding that silence is a mirror of the unconscious and a fertile ground for the emergence of the shadow, an essential question arises. How can we use silence in a constructive, therapeutic, and transformative way? The truth is, when approached with intention and courage, silence stops being uncomfortable and becomes a tool for deep self-awareness. It ceases to be the enemy of anxiety and becomes the cradle of clarity. 1. Silence as a technique for deconditioning. We live conditioned. Most of our thoughts, emotional reactions, and daily behaviors are not conscious choices, they are automatic responses. We repeat inherited patterns, reenact past traumas, and seek validation without even realizing it. But in silence, especially when cultivated regularly, such as in meditation, contemplation, or solitude, these patterns begin to surface. Imagine your mind as a stormy lake. Only when the surface calms can you see the bottom. Silence soothes the mind, and in that calming, reveals what was previously hidden. Over time, you start to notice which thoughts are truly yours, and which were implanted by your family, school, religion, or media. This process of deconditioning is the first step toward true inner freedom. 2. Silence as a space for inner listening. Most people go through their entire lives without ever hearing their own inner voice. This happens because noise, both external and internal, is constant. Social media, notifications, podcasts, music, tasks, conversations, all of it pulls us away from the present moment and the authentic voice of the self. Jung said that every human has an inner compass, a core of wisdom that knows the way even when the rational mind is lost. But that compass doesn't shout. It whispers, and it can only be heard in silence. Setting aside a moment each day to be silent, with no expectations, no goals, is like opening a direct channel to that source. It's not about emptying the mind. It's about sitting with whatever comes, observing thoughts, feeling emotions, allowing the inner flow. Over time, this listening deepens, and you start making choices more aligned with your truth, not with what others expect of you. 3. Silence as a ritual of reintegration. In ancient times, silence was considered sacred. Monks, shamans, and initiates from all traditions understood that true power is born in withdrawal. Today, in a hyperstimulated society, reclaiming silence as a practice is a revolutionary act, and also a ritual of soul reintegration. By regularly setting aside moments of silence, whether upon waking, during walks, or before sleep, you reconnect with your wholeness. It's like sewing together loose parts of yourself, embracing fears, frustrations, hopes, pains, and joys in one inner space. It is in this ritualized silence that deep psychic healing takes place. The paradox of silence, absence that heals. Silence doesn't heal with formulas. It doesn't provide ready-made answers. But by allowing ourselves to be with who we are, without interference, it creates the space needed for truth to emerge. And that truth, even when uncomfortable, is liberating. Therefore, silence is not a luxury, nor an optional resource. It is an essential psychic tool for anyone seeking to grow, heal, and become whole. Silence in the modern world. How to protect your inner space. We live in a world that idolizes noise. Everything around us seems to push us away from ourselves. Notifications, social media, constant productivity, relentless comparison. The modern world is designed to fill every second of silence with some kind of stimulus, pulling us away from the experience of truly being present. But here's the hard truth. Without silence, there is no real self-awareness. Without moments of pause, there's no space for the soul to breathe. And without this breathing of the soul, life becomes just a sequence of tasks completed, goals met, and disguised emptiness. 1. Noise is not just sound, it's psychological. Noise is not just sound. It's also an overload of information, expectations, and hurry. It's the addiction to always doing something, always reacting, always chasing more. This constant hyperstimulation doesn't allow deep psychic content to emerge. Everything important, your unresolved traumas, your true desires, your creativity, your existential questions, gets buried beneath a flood of useless stimuli. That's why protecting your inner silence is not just an act of well-being. It's a matter of mental, emotional, and even spiritual health. 2. creating islands of silence. Simple practices, profound effects. Amid the external chaos, how do you protect this sacred space inside yourself? The answer isn't to abandon the world, but to create islands of silence in everyday life. Small rituals, brief pauses, intentional practices. Here are some powerful ideas. A morning silence. Before looking at your phone or talking to anyone, spend 5 to 10 minutes in complete silence. Notice your breath. Feel your body. A contemplative walks. Walk in silence. No music, no phone, just observing your surroundings and your own thoughts. Silent journaling. Write your thoughts without censorship. It's a way to give voice to what silence reveals. A mindful showers. Turn your shower into a ritual of reconnection, washing not only your body but also the tensions of your mind. Intentional silence before bed. Swap the last scroll through your feed for 10 minutes of reflection or simply being present with yourself. These practices, though simple, have a cumulative impact. Gradually, you'll realize that silence is not an empty space. It's a space full of yourself. 3. Silence as existential resistance. In the modern world, cultivating silence is an act of resistance. Resistance to the conditioning of hurry, to the addiction of performance, to the culture of noise. It's saying, I choose to listen to my soul, even if the whole world is screaming. Carl Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that are important to you. And that communication can only begin if you first know what is important to you. Something only silence can reveal. Protecting silence, therefore, is protecting your essence. It's shielding yourself against the emptiness disguised as productivity. It's honoring your inner rhythm, even when everyone around seems to be running in another direction. Conclusion: silence as a gateway to freedom. Throughout this discussion, we understand that the brain fears silence because it confronts us with naked truths. But if you have the courage to face that initial discomfort, you'll find on the other side a freedom noise can never offer. Silence is not absence, it's full presence. And maybe that's exactly what you need most right now. Not more noise, but a space where your soul can finally hear itself. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone else who's also seeking this space of reconnection. And remember, you have the right and the duty to cultivate your own silence. Because sometimes, the answer we've been looking for lies in what is left unsaid.